So what are the goals of the feminist movement? Obviously, the first one is to achieve a level of societal equality, such as getting better jobs, equal wages, all that kind of stuff. But the goal that this debate is concerned about is not just the practical, it's the principle. The goal of one of the goals is to correct the weird idea, the weird social mentality that women are these sort of weird creatures who are weirdly inferior, right? And these are manifested in the acts of chivalry as ideals of being incapable of buying their own drinks, incapable of opening their doors for some reason. And this, what the affirmative team will assert, is fundamentally not representative of the ideals of what a woman is, right? And so on a principle level, as I will articulate later in my speech, we should be fighting these acts of chivalry. Now, what is an act of chivalry? The affirmative team characterizes an act of chivalry as a sort of low stakes, non-major act, but which is still relatively dangerous, such as like buying drinks, holding doors open, paying for like your meal when you're like on a date or whatever. But the affirmative team will go on to prove to you that these small acts contribute over time in an incremental way to a massive societal misogyny issue. So the first point of substantive from the affirmative team is the principle. And the principle is that as a feminist movement, we must be diametrically opposed to any ideas that fundamentally portray women as unequal. And the reason why encouraging acts of chivalry does this is because it firstly encourages men from when they're very small, from when they're children. It encourages men to view women in a sort of different and special, not really special, but unrelatable fashion, where they're constantly told that women are these weak creatures that you must protect, where they're constantly told that women are these special creatures that you must buy drinks for, where they're constantly told that women are different from you, so you must perform different actions in order to reflect this difference. And what this means is that as these men grow older, this sort of difference that is built from them from a young age eventually transforms and allows them to view women as different, and allows them to project ideals of infantilism on women because they must be protected, because they are different from men. And we believe that this is a very, very, very dangerous idea. And before we get to why it is dangerous, the affirmative team believes that the denouncing acts of chivalry as the feminist movement is very effective in stopping this idea. Because the first thing, in order to actually reject these ideas of chivalry, the affirmative team believes that women should politely do it in a respectful and kind way, such as politely rejecting when men offer to buy drinks, or if someone is holding a door open specifically for a woman, politely saying, hey, you don't need to open this door for me, I can do it myself. And what this does is it fundamentally allows for men to be made aware of their inherent biases. The first reason for this is the firstly very obvious one, that once the acts that perpetrate the mindset that women are different, once those acts stop happening, obviously the mindset will gradually go away, right? That's the first very intuitive level of analysis. The second level of analysis is that when a woman says to a man, hey, you don't need to hold this door for me, it actually creates a conversation. The man goes, okay, why don't I need to hold this door for you? I thought this was a fundamental good. And then there's a conversation that occurs where the woman expresses how this is made her feel unequal, where the woman expresses what they feel about this, and that gradually leads to this issue being brought into the landscape, brought into men's minds, and hopefully solved with greater conversation. Now, given these two mechanisms, why is it extremely important to stop the idea that women are different and infantilized from men? It's because the idea that women are too weak to open their own doors, or too poor to buy their own drinks, or too poor to buy their own meals is offensive to most women. It's just on just a baseline level, it's offensive to most women. And it perpetuates the idea that women are fundamentally less capable. And you know, this is actually on a level of meta-analysis, this is even proved by the way we characterize these acts. We view them as acts of chivalry, as men, as noble knights stepping in to protect women who are damsels in distress. Do you not see the fundamental inequality and the fundamental difference that has been portrayed between men and women by these acts? And the feminist movement believes that on principle, if there are acts that portray women as fundamentally unequal, portray women as fundamentally weak, they must be stopped as a feminist movement, because it is our goal to ensure equality for women, not just on a societal level, but also on a principle and moral level. Now, the second argument, piece of substantive from the affirmative team, is that by fighting these ideas of chivalry, it actually empowers the feminist movement to achieve very, very real practical outcomes. And the first practical outcome is that the attitudes and behaviors that constitute acts of chivalry actually inhibits the fight for equality. And one instant example of this is like basically every single male comedian who goes, surely there's not an idea of women inequality when they get to leave the Titanic first, or like when they're prioritizing the safety of disaster. This is a very real joke that happens all the time, and it shows that men view women as a result of these daily acts of chivalry as protected, as saved, as made more important. And this is important. It's very important to make this distinction that it is men that are viewing these women as such, and not actually society as women. Not actually that women are actually getting any real benefits from this. And what that means is that when there is a massive scandal of inequality, when a woman complains that she's been discriminated against in the workforce, when a woman complains that she's been treated unequally, as men, we think, oh, but on the daily, I try and go out of my way to do these acts of chivalry. On the daily, I try and buy women drinks. On the daily, I try and open doors. How can they be unequal when I am trying on the daily to make them feel special? And what this means is that men are desensitized and alienated from the fight for equality and are less willing to believe women when they say they're unequal. And so fighting this small toxic chess pawn of chivalrous ideals, being able to remove this allows women to enhance their overall ability as a feminist movement to fight for women's rights and equality. The second level of analysis of why this is true is that it actually, by actively rejecting acts of chivalry, the feminist movement's rhetoric as a whole is greatly empowered. Now, it's very intuitive why this is the case. And why this is the case is because when women denounce a sort of privilege of chivalrous acts, when women say, we don't need your drinks, we don't need you buying us meals, we don't need you opening the doors for us. First of all, for the males, it signals that, how? We're giving these people privilege and they're rejecting it. Why is this the case? When we are trying to improve these lives of women, why are they rejecting it? And what this means is that it means that men are more likely to be open to the idea that, women are willing to sacrifice this element of privilege. So there must be something wrong with the privilege they're willing to sacrifice. It must not be as effective as men believe in the idea of fighting for equality of women. It must not actually make them feel safer. It must not actually make them feel more equal. And what this allows the feminist movement to do is say, men, you don't need to go out of your way on a daily basis to do small, meaningless things and make feel better, and that these acts of chivalry actually do not help women in the ways that I've been articulating in my previous aspect of my speech. And what this means is it allows the feminist movement to co-opt men. It allows the feminist movement to say, forget about these small things, focus on the big picture, focus on the institutionalized areas of sexism, focus on the institutionalized areas of misogyny, and that empowers men, co-opts them into the feminist movement, and it enhances the power of the feminist movement as a whole. And that is why we are proud to propose. Thank you.
As a negative, no one respects women more than we do. As feminists, though, as the feminist movement, we believe and support in the advancement of the treatment of women in society. Chivalrous acts are a norm that sees women treated better, so we don't see why we would fight them. We will wage this argument today on these three issues, on the idea of common decency, on why this is bad for women, and why the motion will shrink the movement. But first, just what does the feminist movement look like as an actor? The feminist movement is interested in the advancement of women on all fronts. And because we're interested in advancing women across the advancement of all women, we want to avoid having a prescriptive ideology enforcing people to take actions. So we want to try and make our what women should do as more open-ended to cater to women with many different beliefs. Saying that we should flat out reject chivalrous acts is a way that doesn't seem beneficial to our actors' motivations. So in terms of the first argument about common decency in the feminist movement, so under the status quo, we believe the stance chivalry is often equated to the idea of trying to be a decent person. So for example, look at holding the door open. If I hold the door open for someone, that's just one of the niceties that's been taught to me by my parents on how you should treat women. What I'm doing is actually trying to be nice. And we don't think this is going to have a direct when I'm not doing this out of any sort of benefit. I'm just doing this just to try and be what I think is a respectful person. We, as the feminist movement though, we believe that everyone should just hold the door or just do these other chivalrous acts. We believe the world that where everyone's sprinting to hold the door open for everyone sounds like a utopia. So the mechanisms of what this what this does look like. One, when we're holding the door open for anyone, we're not having this whole intrinsic bias that women need to be like, I guess, respected more just because they're like an inferior creature or whatnot. We're actually gaining the benefits of chivalry and passing that down on to people who don't conform to the conventional ideas of what a woman looks like. The second one is like the idea of like buying drinks and food. Like it's just nice to buy someone like a meal. It's unclear to see like why that's inherently like a bad act in and of itself. And like it's also just pleasant to receive that as well. We believe this does have like a nicer world where in the world where chivalry exists. Third, and like when we're treating everyone with respect, like chivalrous acts are like quite small gestures. Yeah, you do have the far-flung notion of women and children first. We think as a feminist movement, if more women survive from the Titanic, that still helps in our favor. We don't see why we would seek to change this. But like these small gestures aren't a massive change to society. So like we're really talking about like the benefits that will happen on the margins of this argument. So the impacts of this is just like it's a more effective way of just to fighting gender norms itself. If we dissociate chivalrous acts from the male and female dynamic, it's just a way of like firstly like changing these social norms again in a way that positively benefits us if we are concerned about the whole potentially reciprocal nature of chivalrous acts. One that is just nice to people because this does like encourage other people to do small acts of kindness to other people, which we again believe to a more politer world. And third one is just why this will like reduce some of the entitlement that might be seen attached to chivalry. So if everyone's doing it, then there's no real reward. In fact, the reward is if I open the door for a woman, I'm going to have like a woman open the door for me. Like it's kind of like kindness gives on kindness. It's just a way of like a karma system and like reducing, like if there wasn't an issue with entitlement from these acts, having them be reciprocal through doing the same act seems like a good way to go. Second argument on like why rejecting chivalry is bad for women. So like at the moment, like if we do like remove the concept of people performing chivalrous acts, particularly like men performing chivalrous acts for women, we believe like this is just taking away some like these small nice gestures. So like, and if this is taken away from women, we don't see why the feminist movement would support taking something away from women. The mechanisms to explain this argument is the first one on patriarchal norms, how they exist in the status quo and how they affect women. So one of the issues is that like at the moment, like we do expect these chivalrous acts to happen. So like if women decide, like the feminist movement decides that women shouldn't be expected to have the door held open for them. I, as a man, am still going to hold the door open because I'm not included in this thing. But I still exist in a society where this is happening. This is how the norms work. This violates this norm that expects women to accept chivalry, which causes like potentially like harsh responses against women. Like, so if I open it, this might cause like intrinsic bias, going like, okay, why did they turn down? But what should be expected as nice behavior. This is going to cause clashes, just in my own mind. A flat out refusal of chivalry might cause like some dangerous scenarios because like fragile men's egos might get triggered by this. They might turn around and say like, oh yeah, well, you're like the B word. And we would see like an increase in dangerous scenarios against women if we just said like, okay, we're now all rejecting all these chivalrous motions. Second mechanism is like why we're now fighting two norms instead of one. So if we're fighting both the norms of like everything else we're trying to fight against, like the equal treatment of women in terms of like pay discrepancy, like how they see in the workplace and their general place in society, we're also fighting like the idea of like holding the door open. This kind of is splitting like work and like is halving our efficacy on fighting what should be the biggest goals. Because it just means like more efforts, mental energy, and like people's focus is being spread across like these different fighting both norms. And we rather just focus on the bigger norm, which is just fighting for better treatment of women, like for example, like in the workplace. So we, as a feminist movement, we think this is more important. The third mechanism of this is de facto reparations. Like if women are getting paid less, if they do get like bought a meal on the date every now and then, it's just kind of, look, it's not going to have a real substantive value on their economic position, but it's like, oh yeah, it feels a bit nice that like if he's earning a bit more, he's actually doing a bit more to help. If that did exist in that mind, it's just like a nice way of like, yeah, women are treated worse in society at the moment. So we having like these little small benefits are just giving like a couple of more small benefits just to being a woman in this society. The impact of this is like, we think it's bad for us because it's like, if it's bad for women, it's bad for the actor who is a feminist movement. So why the fuck would we do it? The third argument is like how this is going to shrink the feminist movement. So on the moment, like the movement would always prefer to be larger. So like more women in our group would lead to more power, more change, and also like more male allies, which will help further implement our goals. So if it gets, why will it now get smaller? Because women won't actually want to do what the motion provided. So some women will dissociate from the movement, which will look in defecting or leaving, which would leave us worse off. The mechanisms to explain this are, one, women like chivalrous acts. So if you like having the door held open for you, if you like someone else being courteous to you, why would you want to say no just because the feminist movement is telling you to? It's not really clear why this would happen. The second argument is why it's uncomfortable to say no. If I hold the door open, there's also just a social pressure of not acting against like the social niceties in society. Like we want to say please and thank you to not seem rude. You would also want to take my offer to open the door to not seem rude. The third one is like it can actually be dangerous to turn these down. Not the scenario of me, but like if you were turning down like all these different like chivalrous acts, if you really open your mind and thought about the different ways of portraying niceties, you are provoking conflict between strangers, which can create more dangerous scenarios for women. And we don't see like why women want to put themselves in danger to act as a social battering ram for like this new goal of feminism. So as from violating these social norms through this provocative behavior. So the impact of this is just leads to a weaker movement because people will just take the movement less seriously. They won't focus as much. They'll kind of try and push away from being called a feminist because they're going like, okay, we're just going to arbitrarily create conflict lines with men in society through stuff as inane as holding the door open. And like holding door open is just a perfect example of like the philosophy behind a chivalrous act, which is why we've brought it up a lot and why we believe this is a great motion to oppose for us. Thank you very much.
If all negative really wants to fight for is the fact in the very niche circumstance that women are able to get off like sinking yachts a little bit faster, I think that we are willing to cop that maybe in yacht survival situations, women are less able to survive. But I think that because we're able to benefit women more on a societal level, I'm happy to give them that. And I question how much time they spend on yachts. So let's first ask the question, how much what is an act of chivalry? Because they continuously try and run away from the burden that they outset for themselves. Yeah. Because I think it is fine when someone is like in a large group of people, a man gets to the door first, they open it and they let like 20 people in through at the same time. Some moves will men and women. I don't think you raise a big fuss, but there's obviously a time when you're treating them equal. But do not lie to me and tell me that men buy their male friends drinks at the same rate that they buy women drinks, okay? Don't lie to me and tell me that there aren't exactly situations where men do things like, oh, I'll reach up and grab that item off the shelf for you instead of letting you possibly get into risk. Don't lie to me and tell me that men at the exact same rate as they would in a one-on-one situation hold the door open for a man. And don't tell me at the same time that women do not obviously hold the road doors at the same time. What we'd say is the feminist movement ought encourage this and ought encourage both one, polite rejection and active flipping of the norm. That is to say, when possible, women should also hold open the door for men so they're able to reverse this trend of how these things ought to do. They ought also try and where possible pay for drinks and pay for their own, pay for the man's drinks if they want. And we also simultaneously at the same time where you do reject them. Well, first of all, if it would literally put your life in danger, yeah, fine. Yeah, if you think you're about to get shanked because you don't, you said no to having a drink being bought for you, yeah, fine, just accept the drink and make sure it's not spiked. Look out for yourself, girl. But at the point where you can and where you usually should be able to in most individual circumstances, be able to just go no, thank you, I'll pay for this myself. Obviously you're not going to get into a screaming fit saying, you misogynistic man, how dare you offer me, blah, blah. No, be reasonable. The way that you are probably going to reject these as decent human beings is just no, thank you, I'll open the door myself. No, thank you, I'll get this. So I would really like them to stop trying to flanderize the cases after chivalry being this thing that one, everybody does equally to everybody, because no male friends do not buy their friends drinks, but also as this question of we have to do this in an extremely aggressive way, but that's just not how humans work. That's just not how any norm being perpetuated by society we've challenged and fought. So let's ask then the serious questions that we ought ask in this debate, which is one, which is going to better the ability for feminists to be able to fight for actionable change within their movements. The first question that they tell us is that this is fighting two norms at the same time. You're fighting simultaneously the thing about getting equal pay rights, as well as simultaneously the ability to stop these acts of chivalry. We tell you very seriously that these actions, these acts of chivalry, help form the subconscious biases that resulted in the inability of women to get promotions in the first place. That these biases are the reason why men constantly think that women are too delicate to be able to handle the rough and tumble of the business world so they don't get promoted. That subconscious biases do form as a result of the fact that on a daily, day-by-day basis, men are told from a very young age, women are special, they get to go first, they get to survive in the weird ship scenarios, they get to get the door open for them because their arm strength is apparently too week to open a door. They can't afford enough money to be able to buy their own drinks, so we have to pay for them. And when you, on a very daily basis, are inundated with this, inundated with the fact that every single moment of your waking life, you always have to treat women as the sort of weird, infantile, sub-creature who can't do many things for themselves, that does affect the way in which you think about who you ought to promote. That does affect the way in which you think about, what are women? What are they? How are they in relation to work? So if you want to fight the norm that there are subconscious biases within the movement, within society, that result in the movement being unable to get true gender equality in terms of the pay wage gaps and being able to get them in roles such as STEM fields and engineering and all of that sort of stuff, yes, you need to fight this for action, because these actions lead to the biases. But also, we say that there are other really, really simple practical benefits that you get by having a more stronger principle stance upon this issue. Because what they would like to argue to you is that but then women will just leave these actions, and then women will just well, whatever. Well, obviously we say that I don't think that many women are going to leave a result of this, because one, principally, chivalry is infantilizing. Yes, being told on a constant day-by-day basis that you are less than me, I can pay for drinks, you can't possibly afford to pay for drinks. That on a day-by-day basis, I can reach those things, you can't reach those things. I can hold this door open because I have the muscular strength of a man, you cannot, you are too delicate and weak. We say that, first of all, obviously a lot of people are going to feel incredibly infantilized by that. And if nothing else in this debate, I need to hear an answer as to how the negative team is going to address that mindset. But I think on a principle level for the feminist movement to take, if there is this pervasive norm in society that chivalry is going to treat women as infantile, patronize them, and make them feel like lesser citizens, we should principally oppose that. But also it means that a lot of women are likely on board with us when we say that these and bring these out to the issue, which means I don't think as many women are going to leave as they're going to say this. But also, I think if you can just genuinely explain to them why it is better and more likely to be able to get proper female change, a proper change in terms of actual access in practical terms, as we'll explain later, then obviously women will stick around because they realize that that is the trade-off that they have to make, because you have to give up some things in order to get better and bigger final things. But the final thing that we would like to do is we'd like to weigh the tiny amount of women that will leave against the number of men who finally get to realize the feminist movement is something that they ought to support, and say that that amount of extra momentum for the movement outweighs a tiny percentage of women being a little bit offended that they can't get free drinks anymore. What that means is that men interpret these acts to dismiss the feminist movement's claims on a day-by-day basis. We would get more support because we, one, remove the strongest attack that men have against the feminist movement. And I tell you that people buy into movements not on strictly logical grounds, but on emotional grounds, when they feel like that the argument that they are making is right. And the reason that you don't feel like that the argument is right now as a man is because on a very daily basis, there's a constant attitude where you have to treat women better. On your day-by-day basis, an individual man will likely hold the door open for a woman more than they wouldn't have held for a man, will likely possibly buy them a coffee where they otherwise would not have, would have gotten them something and advanced them from a shelf, whatever. All of that signals to the man and tells them, women are treated better than me. I would not have done this to my male friends. I would not have backed them up in that particular way. I would only do this for my female friends. Therefore, there is no female inequality because I treat women better. And we know that this is true because this is oftentimes the biggest fucking attack against the movement. Think of all the times you've seen a comedic routine where Bill Burr is going but women get off boats first, so feminism doesn't exist. I can just keep telling you I don't care if they get off boats first. People don't drown that often. There's not that many fucking Titanics. But also secondarily, you get more support from the men because it seems like you are compromising, right? But when you say to the men and say actively as a movement, we do not want these things because they are unequal. We don't want to be treated as subclass, or we don't want to be treated as special if it's going to be unequal. I think that really passes on a strong message to men. It means that they are likely to be able to get more on board with the message, likely more able to feel and buy into our movement. And I think that at the point where a large majority of men are willing to dismiss the feminist movement because their daily lived experience tells them that the feminist movement is wrong, when they claim that women inequality doesn't exist, I think that more men are going to join this movement than we are going to lose movement. That means we're going to be more effectively able to get change. Very proud to propose.
First negative will very clearly defangs the set of harms that Affirmative is able to bring. It was odd that they chose to give no response at all to it. And we did it in a very, very simple way. We said that instead of asking women to go out and actively reject the norm of chivalry and to tell them to turn down individual instances of chivalry, we would just reframe what chivalry was in the first place, right? We would just take those same acts and say that those aren't chivalrous acts. Those are acts of common decency. Those are acts that everyone should do to everyone. Those are acts that we would encourage everyone to do to everyone and engage in reciprocity. And that very usefully dealt with everything they told you. What did this actually look like? We pointed to examples, right? Opening the door. You should do that for everyone. Like, it's not a fucking grand gesture or anything. You don't deserve anything for doing so. It is a sign of basic respect. It was things like letting people go ahead of you when you were waiting for something. It was things like buying someone drinks or food. The response we get to this is just like, but men don't do that for other men. They just do it for women. Firstly, just wrong, right? Like, you've clearly never been to a pub, right? Everyone buys rounds of drinks for everyone else. That's how it operates. We would frame those things as part of the same norm. But even to the extent that it does not occur already, that was a reason to suggest that we could now make the norm and suggest to people and campaign that those things should now occur, that men should buy their mates meals, that they should buy their friends drinks, that those things should occur equally and in a gender neutral way. And that was the way that you defanged that harm, right? When you disassociated from the idea of gender, when it was something that everyone did to everyone, not something that men did for women, that was a point in time where you got to keep all the benefits of the norm, but you lost all of the harms. What were we able to achieve as a result of this? Firstly, we just think it made everyone much nicer, right? Like, at the point in time where you suggested as common decency that everyone does these kinds of chivalrous gestures, holds the door open for each other, is polite to each other, buys things for each other. That is just a world in which everyone is much nicer to each other. And that in and of itself is a significant benefit that I think the feminist movement would care about. But more specifically, we explained to you that that is far more likely to deal with the harms that this team tells you. We do so in two ways, right? Firstly, by pointing out that this is not like a grand gesture, it is just the bare minimum that you're expected to do. It reduces the sense of entitlement that men have in return for engaging in chivalrous gestures in the status quo. Now, like right now, you buy someone a drink and then you expect something in return because you did something chivalrous, and therefore you should get something back. And you expect that woman to do something for you. And that is the harm in this debate. But we explained to you that now, since this is seen as like basic decency, you cannot expect anything in return, right? Like the definition of something that is basic decency is something that you're required to give to everyone, regardless of anything in return. It is something that just must be given. But even to the extent that that does not convince some people, right? Like maybe some neckbeards are like, oh, but I'm a nice guy. I bought a drink. I deserve something in return. The second response we give here is very useful because we explain that the norm of common decency works on a reciprocal basis, right? Because we now say everyone should act this way towards everyone else. So even if you do believe and are entitled and do think you deserve something in return for buying someone a drink, what you would expect in return is someone else buying you a drink at some future point in time, which will presumably happen. You cannot expect specific favors or specific attention from women or anything anymore. And that was a far bigger harm we dealt with than sort of the vague things Affirmative went on about, which was like women feel infantilized when people buy them dinner. Like, I'm unsure that happens. I think most people probably enjoy being bought dinner. They don't feel infantilized by it. So just on this argument alone, we deal with the harms that Affirmative has in a more effective way. We make the world a nicer place, and we deal with a bigger set of harms than Affirmative ever could. So that alone wins this debate by a very clear margin. But we then bring for you two additional arguments that really just bury this team in the ground. Firstly, we explain to you that this makes the lives of women much worse on an individual and day-to-day basis in a series of ways. Firstly, we point out that in many situations, rejecting chivalrous actions is just dangerous. And that is for very simple reasons, right? There are a lot of patriarchal norms that tell women that they have to be polite, that they have to be respectful, that, they can't upset anyone. And similarly, there are a lot of men who are very entitled out there and who don't handle rejection very well. And at the point in time where you now are asking women to engage in much more frequent rejection, right? Like now you're telling them anytime someone offers you a drink, reject them. Anytime someone does a chivalrous act for you, reject them. That is the point in time where you're inviting much more of that harm upon them. There is a greater risk of that violence. And the response we hear to this is just like, firstly, well, you wouldn't have to do it in scenarios where you suspected violence. You don't know who's going to be violent until it happens, right? Like, it's not like there's some predictor of which guys might turn out to be a weirdo or a creep. You don't know that in advance, which is why you presumably don't want to take the risk, which is why women do things like give people fake phone numbers rather than just telling them they're not interested, because they're scared that that might lead to a bad place, right? Or they don't want to handle that interaction. You force upon them much more of those negative interactions. The second thing they say is just sort of like, well, obviously this debate isn't about those kinds of things. It's not about scenarios which are dangerous. It's not about scenarios of common decency, like holding the door open. It's not about scenarios like the Titanic. It's about all the other scenarios, none of which they could name because they don't exist, right? But even if that was the case, that is just proof that our norm is working, right? The fact that people or the affirmative team might perceive things such as opening the door, a literal example in the info slide, as not an act of chivalry anymore, is proof that removing the association of gender from these norms and calling them common decency does work in reducing the harms that they suggest, right? Now it is viewed as a bare minimum and the very benefits we identify there do occur. But even if, so all of that then deals with like all of those responses. We give you two more reasons to believe that this will make life worse for women. Firstly, we just point out very simply, this requires the movement to fight two separate norms, right? Instead of just fighting the disadvantages women face and demanding better treatment there, they now also have to fight against the things that are being given to women in a chivalrous fashion and reject those things. That is two things you have to do instead of one thing. That means that you are now less efficacious in fighting against either of those norms. And at the point in time where one of those norms was about demanding rights for women and the other was like about not getting free meals, one of those things was clearly far more important and should have been given far more time and far more effort. But thirdly, we point out that it just adds insult to injury for women, right? Because it's bad enough that patriarchy fucks them over in a whole bunch of ways and makes them, like have worse lives. Why should they also have to give up the few benefits that unjust system gives to them in order to be like principally consistent? We would say that, for example, if you live in a corrupt country where the government, wastes your money, you shouldn't have to not receive welfare or services in order to be like principally opposed to that government. That principle was immoral and we did not support it. But even if you did believe in that principle, that was a reason the movement should explicitly make trade-offs of like, we would be happy to support like children only on life rafts, not like women and children, in return for equality in these specific regards, not a reason to unilaterally give up those benefits and then hope that like the rhetoric improves and you get those benefits down the line. But lastly, and the third way we win this debate, we explain to you it harms the movement in a very direct way, right? We explain to you that because women often like chivalry, they don't want to turn down free drinks at the club. We explain to you that because it makes women really uncomfortable, they will not do this. Because it could be dangerous, they won't do this. And when they don't do this, they will ask themselves, why did the movement try and use me as a social battering ram for change? Why did the movement try and put me in a dangerous or uncomfortable situation or make my life worse for some future benefit of normative change that may or may not occur? And at that point, they will lose faith in that movement. At that point, they will lose trust in that movement. And that is when the movement loses size and its capacity to help, to lobby, and to influence. And that is the most direct harm in this debate. We win this debate on three separate grounds by very clear margins. Incredibly proud to debate.
Speaker, our burden in this debate was not to prove that somehow the feminist movement should, instead of encouraging people to reject Office of Chivalry on principle, should instead accept them 100% of the time. People could clearly, obviously do this in the status quo, right? Our burden in this debate was to prove that our method of addressing the issues associated with chivalry, namely by defanging the norm by making it gender neutral expectation of politeness instead of one of chivalry, and encouraging acts which go in that direction, was one that was superior to the opposition's model. And that was something we very conclusively did in this debate. Let's firstly talk about infantilization, since that is the only grounds for principally rejecting this thing in the first instance, right? The first thing to ask is, are these acts inherently condescending? And the answer to that is just no, right? Someone taller grabbing a jar off the top shelf for me is just helpful. It is not condescending to me because I am 5 foot and they are 6 foot, right? Like that is just clearly something I cannot do. And this person is offering to do it for me as an act of goodwill so I don't have to fetch a footstool. Or like if they open the jar, that is not them flexing their muscles because they want to try and fuck me. That might just be because there are in fact non-gender related reasons for people to want to do these things. And by and large, the other explanation that can be associated with them, as conceded by the affirmative affirmative team in this debate is one of politeness, is one of universal, just human kindness to everyone who comes across your doorstep, regardless of whether or not they're a woman. Which then indicates that our capacity to actually implement this model is quite high, right? Because people are already in the mindset where they're like increasingly becoming aware that like, hey, maybe I should do this thing for all people instead of, you know, one specific sex. Then it becomes more likely that we are able to say, actually, we as the feminist movement would like to say, you should probably be buying drinks for the boys as well as for whoever it is you're looking to chat up, right? I think that is a norm we are fully capable of standing behind in this debate. We don't have to also then encourage women to reject those norms as part of this particular policy, right? So then we have two questions to we then have two particular avenues by which we can solve this by which we can solve the only actually condescending thing about chivalry, right? Which is the gendered expectation in the first place. And there are two ways that each team goes about it, right? The first way we get from Aff is that there is an outright rejection to decondition people from these expectations, and from the neg we have the idea that we should make them gender neutral by associating with them with common politeness and promoting them as something that everyone should do. The first argument in this regard is just like, but what if they only do things for women? Surely you must be like opposed, surely you must like treat that in a weird way, right? But obviously, presumably, as I flagged earlier, right, we can just have feminists instead ask why these people don't do this for men too, while also not necessarily rejecting that offer outright, right? We can still have people like accepting meals, but like if it becomes clear that they're only doing it because you're a woman and they're not, it is probably fine to just like say, hey, like that particular guy has been treating you pretty well. How about you like, I don't know, give him a meal because he's been like doing you a bunch of favors or whatever. I think that is something we were within our rights to do as a negative team, right? If they can say additionally, right, that their model is more convincing because, you know, men outright having their offers of relatively reasonable hospitality rejected to their face by women is also more convincing than actually acting in men's self-interest here, right? Like by allowing men to access the exact same things. Surely we reject the notions that all the neck bits they want to push on us as having to convince in this debate. Surely all of those people are suddenly much more open to the ideals of the feminist movement because we are finally acting in an equal way, right? Instead of pushing for women to reject seemingly reasonable and polite requests by men, instead what we do is say, hey, how about we make these things something which is accessible to everyone? How about you like buy like a dinner at like this local restaurant if you're taking him out to lunch or something? And that is something which I think men are much more receptive to, which men in general are going to be much more likely to be receptive of, because obviously it directly benefits them. And it also plays into a much more favorable norm, which is to say one of accepting hospitality, one of seeming like a nice person, one of just being kind to your fellow man, right? That is something that blokes especially appreciated considering notions like mateship, right? Those are inherently more appealing concepts to these people, especially the people who have sexist tendencies and have not been called about it before, rather than direct rejection of something which society broadly sees as, you know, something which is polite, something which is good, and something which they should be doing, like, which they should be doing. It is only their implementation which is wrong. So then we should ask then, which option more benefits women? And note here, right, that obviously when we rebut the norm that women are weaker by making a gender neutral expectation, the idea that we can, you know, that the idea that we have to contend exclusively with the harm that, you know, women are being talked down to all the time is surely not only non-exclusive in this debate, but by the persuasion mechanisms that I bring up to you in my previous point, right? Surely that indicates we are much more likely to get these benefits than they do, and thereby mitigate all the harms that they have on their side significantly more effectively. But also, right, in terms of the actual means of rejection in this world, right, where we would have women reject these particular instances, it is not because they are rejecting them on principle. It's instead rejecting them, say, because, you know, they can't actually reciprocate in the moment. It's like, oh, I don't have enough cash on me to also buy you a drink. I'm sorry, I can't take this, which is something that is much more likely to be accepted by people than, like, I don't know, I'm rejecting this on principle because you're talking down to me, right? That implies a level of hostility, that implies a level of menace, which most people would feel rightly offended at being accused of, even if they do have subconscious sexual biases, right? Like that is something which is going to be significantly much less likely to provoke a bad response from men who notably have incredibly fragile egos and incredibly flared tempers. That is something which meant that, like, even in the instances where both sides would support rejecting them, people rejected them in a significantly less harmful way under our side of the house, and that was a comparative benefit that we claimed. The additional thing to say here is like, but women have senses for creeps, and so therefore they will know exactly when to bust out the rejection at the appropriate time. Obviously, this firstly has horrific implications for where the sources of, like, violence against women comes from. Is it perhaps because these women did not have finely tuned ninja senses, right? But also secondly, that just kind of does not actually accept the way in which abuses actually work, right? The entire reason why abuses are allowed to flourish is because they appear non-threatening at first and then display hostile tendencies when they are provoked sufficiently. And in the world that the affirmative wants to propose, they appear much more justified when doing it, because instead of being like, oh, no, I don't want to go home with you after you have accepted their drink, instead you say, oh, no, I don't want your drink, something which is significantly less palatable to society, something which renders you significantly worse lights than you would be under our side of the house. The final thing to talk about then is in relation to feminism. And if we have already won the point that we benefit women more, then surely this is just a smashing win. But if we don't, right, we still have a couple of reasons to demonstrate that women might be less receptive to this particular version of feminism. And that is for the simple reasons that Will and Udai both give you, namely that obviously women just like having nice things. Yes, it may be like relatively inconsequential in regards to like the grand scheme of things, but I don't know, having leftist tendencies does not ban you from buying an iPhone. You live in the system. Surely if you get an advantage from living in that system, you're probably going to be happy with taking that advantage, even if you think it comes from an unfair place, because you just simply do not want to get left behind. You do not want to not benefit from something which is, something that is one of the only upshots of being in a disadvantaged position, and then also have all the harms that Udai and Will tell you about that come associated with rejecting these particular norms, right? That was a double dip in terms of harms against these particular women. And that was something that was much more likely to make them feel that this was an unreasonable position, not only for principle standpoints, because rejecting hospitality, as we have told you down the bench, is just clashing with every single norm that society, even less sexist society, tells you is acceptable. But also we told you that because it had practical downsides for these women and also intensified the burdens that they had to carry, surely this just meant that people were significantly less satisfied with the movement and overall felt it was less reasonable, something which is especially bad considering the image crisis that feminism currently faces. Look, the burdens that Affirmative wanted to push in this debate were both non-exclusive and also incredibly unreasonable. If you believe that our way of solving the only part of chivalry, which is condescending, is better than theirs, then surely we must win, and I believe we have done so already.